Okay, so it's just about 12 o'clock. I just want to welcome everybody. My name is Diana Reuter. I'm here with the New York Council on Problem Gambling. We are hosting this wonderful training, Understanding and Treating Sports Betting in Clinical Practice. And our speaker today, Jody Bechtold, is going to join us, and she's going to speak to you with lots of wonderful information. I just have one thing on the screen. I just want to remind everybody, if you are here and you need a certificate for attendance, for OASIS credits, or for social work credits, just be sure that you log back into your training center after the webinar is complete in order to complete the evaluation, in which case your certificate will automatically populate in your locker. If you have any issues, you can email the email on the bottom, nycpgtraining@nycpg.org, and I'll be able to assist you. And then we also just want to remind you, we do have an upcoming webinar with Jody again on October 30th, treating gambling in the new era of gambling. So you can register for that at the training center as well. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. We do have an interpreter here with us today, so you might see that window pop up. You can close that if it does not pertain to you. And we do have closed captionings available for anybody who might need them. If you have any questions, I will be on the call. You can drop it in the chat box or email directly for any technical assistance. And with that, I'm going to hand it right over to Jody.
Thank you, Diana. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. All right. Let me get my windows situated. How is everyone today? I really appreciate you choosing to spend an hour with me at lunchtime on a Monday. So we're going to just go ahead and jump right in. I have a lot of information that we're going to cover today. And hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end, or you can also email me at any time. So there's a couple disclaimers throughout this training. We have some copyrighted information, and then you're going to see some research from Albany University that's also needs to be copyright protected. For those who are not familiar with me, I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Pennsylvania, and I have a couple different letters after my name. Most of those are based on the International Gambling Counselor Certification Board with the ICGC Level 2 and the Board Approved Clinical Consultant. I'm the CEO of a group practice in Pittsburgh, and I'm the president now of the board for the International Gambling Counselor Certification Board. All right, so some of the things that we're going to do today is we're going to really understand more about the current research on sports betting, problem gambling, and other addictive disorders. And I want you to be able to get much more familiar with some of the risk factors for individuals that might be more prone to sports betting and problematic gambling. We'll tap into what it means to understand more of that athletic mindset. And then we're going to share some evidence-informed clinical interventions that we have found to be very successful working with individuals that are sports betting. So let's kind of review the current landscape just to make sure we're all on the same page. And what I want you to do is think and kind of look through the lens of a young sports bettor, okay? When I kind of go through some of the landscape. More than ever, gambling is everywhere. We're typically used to seeing it at maybe a casino, but you see these, they take up a lot of real estate. And so even the games that appear in the brick and mortar are appealing to different age groups to try and keep their attention. Depending on where you live, you can even gamble at a grocery store, right? And then my favorite, this is actually a lottery kiosk at an airport. I'm pretty sure that's not being watched to make sure someone under the age of 18 isn't using it. But what really is happening in this latest wave of legalized gambling is the smartphone, right? This mobile device, this thing that is now 5 inches from our face at any given time, is what we're really talking about in terms of this current landscape. We still have the illegal websites, but they're hard to distinguish. Bovado's been around for quite some time, but that's actually not a legal site. And it's getting easier and easier to normalize gambling, right? So here's a 50-50 raffle at a hockey game, right? And when we think about that, now you can use your credit or your debit card to participate in that 50/50 raffle. And then if you're at the hockey game, if that wasn't enough, you can actually be enticed to bet from your seat so that you're betting on games maybe that you're watching as well as on other games. And so this is kind of setting the tone for individuals that are really getting involved in sports betting. Notice here in this picture, this is common across all states that have legal sports betting. You're seeing male socializing, and you're seeing the mix with alcohol while watching their favorite teams and or teams they have money on. And how many of you have seen some gambling advertisements while watching TV? Just a few, right? Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Linda, for raising your hand. Right. So this research that came out, kind of a more of a not like a evidence-based research, but in April of this year, they're saying you spend up to 20% of every game watching advertisements. Right. So they're looking at counting the number of gambling messages that are on the logos, the commercials, sponsored segments, and anytime betting odds appeared on the screen. So a lot of the down below, the tickers moving. And more than 90% of logos or references were found directly on the surface, whether that was the court or rink side, right? And so we're really normalizing gambling is a part of sports and entertaining, watching sports. So think about this new person coming to see you for care. This is kind of their worldview right now. And with this, we call it the crossover effect, because now we're using sports and mixing it with gambling in a different way. So on the left-hand side, you're going to see casinos, slot machines that are all about your favorite team. Another ways to gamble in the middle screen, and then scratch offs that also support a team that you might be a fan of. Right. So think about being much younger and seeing this kind of as for the first time and thinking this is the way it's always been. So then let's talk about the athletes and this world of gambling, because you're probably going to pick up a lot more of the news stories that we've been seeing the last couple of years. So this is a little bit dated now, but there's 2 points to make about this. I don't know if you followed Calvin Ridley, but you see his tweet down below. I bet 1,500 total. I don't have a gambling problem. He had since come out with his story that really helped us see kind of what life was like when he was growing up, kind of some of those vulnerabilities, and then obviously being an athlete. But the other part of this slide is the suspensions. He got suspended for 17 games, which is the entire season for gambling. And you can see other athletes in the NFL were suspended for a couple of games for domestic violence or 6 games for child abuse, right? So think of this message that is being given to anyone that gambling is so terrible as an athlete that if you gamble, you're going to be suspended for the whole game. Which unfortunately, we also know there hasn't been a lot of prevention and, helping people understand in this much more active world that we live in of sports betting, how easy it is to, fall prey to this. Not meant for you to read all the names, but it's an illustration since 2019 all the way through 2024. This was as of June. You can see the lists are getting longer of pro athletes that have suspensions. So there's something there that, we're not catching up with. We're not doing something to even protect the professional athletes, because we're seeing more and more of them getting in trouble, which is not to say they might not have gambled before, but because it's just so much more accessible, we would expect to see this number increase. And then there's just different articles that you can pick up at any given time about players, violating or getting in trouble or being investigated, all for sports betting. A former NCAA athlete talks about all the betting and the bookmaking that he did in his career. We have an umpire that gets disciplined, right? And now we have a Major League Baseball player that gets banned for life for sports betting. And there's such gray areas with all of this, because what causes someone to get banned for life? Is it because they bet on their own team, right? What is it? And how do we, really understand this? So we're kind of far behind in, the way we're viewing this. We're really punishing people instead of looking at this as a mental health or addictive disorder, right? And I don't know if you've seen the newest NCAA policies and their punishment about gambling. We've always known that NCAA was zero tolerance. Okay. Now, as we have our expanded legalized gambling, look what they've come up with. They've now changed it to the different dollar amounts that were wagered and what the potential penalty might be or punishment. So just look through this. 200 or less, you get, you have to revisit the rules. You have to understand and take prevention education. Then it goes on up to greater than $800, right? Lots of potential eligibility rules, and you still have to do prevention education. But notice what is missing from all of this, right? Treatment. Where would we send someone after they've already admitted that they've wagered? They're just supposed to take prevention education, but it's too late. So this is very gray, really confusing messages, especially for young athletes when you think about these are college age, the NCAA. I don't know if you saw an announcement that Dave and Buster's was going to allow gambling on arcade games, right? And Dave and Buster's has always been recognized, right, with kind of the arcade for kids, but it's still adult-like because of the, serving alcohol and things like that. So this is a really interesting twist on, Chuck E. Cheese and Dave and Buster's. So this was back in the end of 2022 when we still only had 35 states. We're now at 38 and counting. But really, this article was talking about what little oversight there is with this gambling spread. And they're talking about the universities that got involved. And when you think about it at a university level, you have quite a lot of individuals that are not of legal age yet to gamble, right? And so these universities were even incentivizing students to download the app and check it out. And overwhelmingly, the iGaming part of this. So it's all on a smartphone, tablet, desktop, right? Computer, anything that is so easy. And our phones are always with us. So is the gambling. Here is from the group out of the University of Memphis. They have a whole gambling clinic now. And one of the therapists was saying, I treat people with a gambling disorder, and I'm seeing more and more young men betting on sports, right? So we have this new group emerging, and the apps make it so easy to just check it out. And then they start pinging and notifying all of, do you want to place another bet? All of those things. And it's really problematic when we think about these smartphones 5 inches from our face. So what does the research tell us so far, right? If we've had legalized gambling since 2019 in most states, my state was one of the first 4, so I've been dealing with this in Pennsylvania for quite some time, right? What are we starting to see? And so Grubbs and Krause have been very busy, so they've got lots of publications coming out. So let's review these first 2. In their 2022 research, they're identifying that sports bettors are male, they're younger with this average age of 26. They tend to be more educated, and they have higher income, and they're gambling in a state where it's already legal. Okay, so think about that for a minute. More educated means, better, well-paying jobs. So then the higher income. but they're still pretty young at the average age of 26, which we know that's also starting to trend even younger. Now, if you're younger and you have a really good income, you probably don't have a lot of expenses yet to match that. And so it feels like a lot of disposable income. And so this group is really getting caught with having, a lot left over, which to them is a lot at that age. And then, they have this skewed view, that distorted thinking we think of with CBT of how much money. Oh, what's $1,000 on a game, or what's $1,000 gambling for a weekend, when that can be a very large dollar amount to someone else. Right. And so when I read this research, I said, wow, this is exactly what I'm seeing in my clinical practice. And I'm seeing this higher income and this almost what we would say failure to launch. Right. So the parents are still paying their cell phone bill because it's on the family plan, or they're still helping them with car insurance because that's also grouped together. And so even though they have good paying jobs, they don't have a lot of the adult financial responsibilities to match that, which then frees up a lot more money to gamble. In their 2023 study, they found all forms of sports wagering were positively associated with addictive or problematic use of alcohol, prescription drugs, marijuana, pornography viewing, and video gaming. So we're seeing this coupling of addictive behaviors, risky behaviors, things like that. The video gaming is also really interesting because you have a generation that grew up always knowing video gaming. So they're very comfortable in that world. They're very comfortable with the technology. And so it's very easy to just move over and start gambling in the tech space, in the online space with confidence. So what this means is we have to start to really be asking a lot more questions when someone presents for care. If someone presents for other reasons, you still want to kind of screen for the gambling, but start paying attention to how this might be coupled together in some way. What they also found out was when you see the traditional sports wagering, daily fantasy sports, and esports wagering, um, you're going to see greater frequency with the substance use across all substances, not just alcohol. There's that greater video game play again, and there's that greater pornography consumption. So sports wagering, daily fantasy sports, and for many, daily fantasy sports was where people started, right? This is where you could place bets and kind of have your daily fantasy sports, even in a state where sports betting wasn't legal yet. So like California is an example. It's sports betting is not legal there, but they have daily fantasy sports. And then the esports wagering. So they're comfortable with the video gaming. So these are teams that compete playing video games. And then there's wagering on top of that, whether it's wagering at the team that will win or how individual players will perform. So if you're not familiar with esports, it's no different than what we think of with physical sports like football, hockey, soccer, baseball, anything like that. It's just teams that are playing video games in a very competitive level. So naturally, you're going to see that daily fantasy sports and esports wagering associated with greater symptoms of addiction. Okay. Some other research that came out, the clinical correlates of sports betting. So this is quite a few names on this research study, came out in the Journal of Gambling Studies in 2023. So what they're talking about here is they're finding that young single males, college educated, full-time jobs, higher salaries. My favorite is the participation in sports, lottery or slot machine gambling, right? Also finding that, have a friend who gambles, seeing that higher impulsivity, lower self-directed levels, right? With the online sports betting. And we're seeing this strongly linked to gambling problems and cognitive distortions. Think about the illusions of control, think about the probability, right? And all the distortions that go along with gambling. So what this is really talking about is kind of grouping all of the research that's been out there and summarizing what we're seeing over and over again. So why do I keep talking about the research? because it's telling us who are the sports bettors for the most part, but it's not necessarily telling us what to do when we work with them. Yeah, I see somebody has their hand up. You can go ahead and give me your question. Might not know you have your hand up. Okay. Some other current research, right? So this is, again, Krauss was involved in this one. Looking at the marketing and promotions of sports betting have been found to be influential, persuasive, and associated with higher sports betting related behaviors and can motivate bettors to want to gamble. So the marketing is a big deal, and we're seeing how it's influencing individuals. We're also seeing another one from Grubbs and Krauss. So these are all different reports that they put out in just a couple of years, that people who gamble on sports report a greater frequency of an engagement. Sorry, I got to move my window here. Wider variety of gambling activities and higher rates of problem gambling. Right. So we're seeing again that coupling is really having an impact. All right, hold on, got to move my screen. There we go. Okay. And then again, another study about sports betting and hazardous alcohol use among young adults, right? These findings show early stage evidence for a link between problem sports betting and alcohol related problems among young adults. So that coupling again goes together. For many of the young individuals, they've always watched sports, even as a young person, thinking about maybe the fantasy football leagues, learning more about the daily fantasy sports, and now coupling it with alcohol. How many of you have seen the Time magazine article that came out in December of 23? What we're seeing here is they're estimating 1 in 10 college students has a gambling disorder. That's a lot. And that 60% of those college students has bet on sports, and 4% are betting daily. So with the college age student, we're calling it the next opioid crisis, right? Which is pretty powerful statement. So if we kind of play with that a little bit, we think about what does that mean? Let's look at a university outside of our states. Colorado is a big university. So they have around 45,000 students. If you took 4% from that article, that's 1,800 students. That might not sound like a big number given 45,000, okay, 1,800. And then if you even took 4% of that 4% that followed through with help, 72 looks like a really small number. If we look at it a different way, 1 in 10 has a gambling disorder, that's 4,500 students. And if 4% of those 4,500 ask for help, that's 180. Now, when you first look at these seem like really small numbers, okay? But where do they go for help is the question. Many universities across our country in their counseling centers or their counseling staff are not doing any training or workforce development around how to treat problem gambling. So even if some of these students went to a counseling center to ask for help, they most likely would get a clinician or a staff person that didn't understand treating gambling disorders, right? So this is a big issue. Some researchers like Dr. Michelle Malkin out of North Carolina, her college campus research is showing that it's as high as 12%, right? Not even 4%. So we actually don't even know potentially how many students and will they even present for care. Which leads us to Dr. Cimini's and team's research. I was able to meet with her and she shared some of her slides that I thought would be very helpful in kind of bringing this together. So she's presented this at the annual conference in 24. I believe they're going to be presenting more in the fall, in maybe November. But they were looking at gambling, cannabis, and alcohol across the student population. right? Here's their copyrights. They have to make sure that they have these. She told me this was really important because of where they got their funding and their grant to do this study. And they're really starting to look at gambling and just college students in general and what is making them so vulnerable, right? And so being exposed both on campus and around the community with, encouraging to gamble. You can see the advertisement for DraftKings at a baseball game. She's commenting in her research about the predatory advertising that I mentioned and the incentives and promotions within those sports betting apps, even just to sign up or a referral or get those bonus codes. And then because it's online, it makes it just so easy on a smartphone. I just keep saying, this is 5 inches from someone's face. And then we're looking at the legalization, right, of what's caused this increased prevalence. Obviously, the widespread legalization of sports gambling and online, right? And then the intense advertising targeting to young individuals. National surveys say about 75% of college students had reported gambling in the past year, and that 6% have a serious gambling problem, right? So again, think about workforce development. Where are these students going to go and get help, as these numbers are pretty alarming? So they're looking at the unique addictive features of this whole online world, right? And it's so much easier and it's perceived to be safe when you are doing this, making these wagers, because it feels like it's skill based. Now, this is going to contribute to those false illusions of control. When we saw that other research talk about distortions, cognitive distortions, and this fits in with that. And then the ability to do the live betting. Some people will refer to this as in-game betting. So not only do you have a bet on the outcome of a game, but you can be gambling the entire game. So you can imagine how much you can wager in a very short amount of time. So looking at that in-game betting, what happens is that it delays that risk and reward, and it increases the speed and frequency. And when you take someone that's under the age of 25, you also have the brain isn't being fully developed yet with that prefrontal cortex, right? So unfortunately, it's really causing some vulnerabilities. So when they looked at lifetime prevalence, right, they're seeing almost 25% have said that they have gambled. Different types of games, you're seeing a pretty high once a week, this once a week orange color, 18% for cards, 20% for the lottery. What about for online? Here you're seeing 8%, almost 12% for sports betting for once a week. So these are big numbers when you think about a college population, right? And then look at this playing the stock market, 15%. That's a lot. And that comes from some of those apps, like the Robinhood apps about, buying stocks and Bitcoin and things like that, trying to get individuals in learning a lot more about the stock market at a younger age, where they don't have to buy stocks, a full amount of stocks. They can buy percentages of stocks. Bowling, shooting, other games, 7%, right? And there's your esports. So definitely this is kind of silent depending on where you are in terms of understanding how much wagering goes on with esports. And of the entire student population reporting lifetime gambling, you're looking at cards and poker, the lottery, sports betting, and the stock market. So that's pretty alarming for doing that at least once a week or more frequently. So you're looking at, 18% is the lowest, and we know that's going to continue to grow. Who is reporting gambling at this university? White students, men, being older in age, older in class, right? Or a transfer student is what they were showing. Because then that fits with a lot of the research that I just presented. And we're seeing a correlation with alcohol use and cannabis together, alcohol and lifetime gambling, and binge drinking and gambling. What's interesting is to not see a correlation with cannabis and lifetime gambling. Again, it just depends on the student population, what we might see. I see a lot of cannabis and sports betting and alcohol coupled together in the young adults that I treat. And then they put this nice little infographic together, kind of summarizing things, right? And so 45% of the students reported gambling in the last year. And of that, 10% scored at risk or high risk on the South Oaks gambling screen, or the SOGS. Who are they in the last year? They typically were male, white, involved in some sort of fraternity. And I don't know what EOP stands for. It might be non-traditional student, but someone can correct me on that. And then they're reporting, again, higher scores with alcohol and drug use, frequent use of tobacco and vaping, alcohol use, higher rates of heavy episodic drinking, and more frequent cannabis use. So we're definitely seeing these all come together. Methods for gambling, right? Betting with friends, lottery tickets, sports betting, playing cards, and online, and endorsing that they were feeling bad about betting money, almost 10%, gambling more than they had planned, and being criticized or told they had a gambling problem. There is something about the peers that is, they're gambling together, they're viewing it as friends, but there are also peers can then say, hey, whoa, what are you doing? That's a lot. But there's barriers. So remember, I talked about the counseling center and the work staff development. But in Dr. Cimini's research, they're finding that the students actually wouldn't go to the counseling center if they had problems and experienced related to gambling. They don't think the counseling might help them, right? They have all kinds of barriers here related to, in cannabis, gambling, alcohol. They're afraid, right? Not sure they have a private space. The stigma is still there, believe it or not, with this younger generation. And then they might not think they can afford the counseling services, depending on how the university does that. So those are really big issues that kind of set the tone. So now that we kind of have this idea of who we need to be looking at, I wanted to share with the next about 25 minutes, and I think I definitely want to have room for question and answers to talk about what is a clinical approach that can work for treating sports betting. Now, we're still waiting for research to give us that clinical evidence. So this is, informed based on, the years, and we've done a lot of research with our own data to see what was happening. So think for a moment that you have athletic or former athletes as I want you to think about who is athletic. And when we say athlete, I don't want you to see that we're talking about elite athletes. What we're really talking about is anybody that has passion for sports, that is interested in watching sports, that enjoys that competition, has past experience in sports of any kind, whether they played at a youth level, they coach now themselves, depending on the age, because this is a generation that grew up with fantasy sports. And so it's a very easy transition to sports betting. When we think about the research, male, younger, right? Typically we'll see that. Not to say women don't do sports betting, but not at the same rates. So what makes anybody with that athletic background or passion more at risk for sports betting? We have to think about how athletes are wired. Athletes do very well in their sport because they have that competitive mindset and they are natural risk takers, right? Think about anybody that might play football or hockey, right? And they know how to push the limits, both mentally and physically. So while this is great for athletes, you can see it is not good for gambling. That competitive mindset, natural risk taking, and pushing the limits with gambling, not a good mix. So here's why they might be more at risk. Athletes and that athletic mindset, they tend to have those perfectionistic tendencies. So they master their craft mentally, right? And they don't accept losing well. This is great as an athlete. This is what keeps them working harder and harder to master their craft. But as you can see, that does not play well for gambling, where they keep thinking they have to master their bets and be better at it. And then they don't accept losing well, which then will create the need to keep chasing or keep betting to win. The pressure to perform. Unfortunately, at any age these days, anyone who's playing sports, they got a lot of pressure from the coaches, from the parents, from their teammates, and from their friends. And then you add in the social media comparison game, where they're seeing other athletes, other team members, and how they're performing, right? And so this pressure to perform is very, very devastating for them. Now, add gambling to that, and that pressure to perform and do well at gambling, right, makes them more at risk. And last, the injury. When someone is injured and they can't play with their team, they feel that sense of isolation. They might even lose their sense of identity if they're out for a season, or they have to switch and go to a different sport because of a career-ending injury. And when you're injured and not playing, you might even have that loss of structure. So we do know that many individuals, when they're injured, actually might fall because of the isolation and the lack of structure to gambling. And that example of Calvin Ridley, in his article, he actually was gambling when he was currently injured. So we see that connection as well. So with all approaches to treating gambling, we definitely, there's three focus areas that I say in general we want to attend to. Now, what we're going to talk about is those general and then more specific related to sports betting, so that you can walk away feeling that you have some tools in your toolbox for how to have that conversation and have that treatment discussion with someone that's a sports bettor. Overall, with time, we want to help people deal with boredom, right? Because idle time, right, is not good for someone who really craves that structure as well. We want to help people learn to keep busy and schedule activities, give them back their structure, and even find new hobbies or activities to fill their time. So if they're going to stop gambling, we've got to fill that time from that device that was 5 inches from their face that they could be constantly engaging in. So this can be a bit of a challenge, but you want to have the conversation and really start doing some problem solving with the client about how to fill their time. We're always looking at access to gambling. Many ways, blocking software, there's Gamban and Bet Blocker are the two popular ones that people are talking about and using. This is really helpful because then it blocks even the illegal sites that someone might have been accessing. There's definitely self-exclusion. We know this can be a bit of, to sign up for someone who's pretty young. So sometimes just even encouraging them to just sign up for 1 year, which buys them enough time to learn some better skills and some other healthier coping strategies. And definitely that accountability, right? Being able to have someone monitor their internet or app usage or their, right, even their funding, anything like that. And then third focus area is the access to money. Helping this younger generation create a budget and track their income and expenses. This is a group that might not really have a good relationship with money ever. They grew up in that digital space where everything was virtual with Venmo and Cash App and PayPal and things like that. So we've got to actually teach them to have a healthy relationship with money. My quote is always, money is supposed to hurt when you spend it, right? For all of us, we have to think about that. For some, there's going to be restitution, being able to pay back those debts that were caused by gambling. The debts that we're seeing from young individuals on campus and young adults, these are not small amounts. They add up very quickly because, again, that distortion about money, real money, and how fast it can spend. And if you haven't used the TrueLink financial card, the Visa, that's a prepaid card. You might want to look into that. This is a great way to help people stay within budget. And it looks like a real Visa card with their name on it, so their friends wouldn't know any difference. But it actually blocks certain transactions. So if people are really being serious about not gambling, um, blocking the transactions, access to money is a really key part of that. So time, access to gambling, access to money, those three key areas. Now, you would do this with anyone that has problematic or gambling disorder behavior. So what else do? We know the research is very strong for CBT in treating gambling disorders. You get a lot of that cognitive distortion work that goes on. A lot of the ABC stuff. I believe, I get paid, or I got money, I got a school loan, money in the bank. I can double that. And then what ends up happening is I lose more than I intended. Stress management, that mindfulness and meditation, we know the research supports this as well, helping people be in the present. And then support groups, right? Anything like Gamblers Anonymous or any other support group reduces that isolation. So the research absolutely supports this for treating of anybody with a gambling disorder. So how do we use that specifically with sports bettors that tend to be younger and younger? So we have taken this approach from it's called Back in the Game, and we have developed this at our group practice. And it's 6 focus areas. So as I go through these, I want you to think how to apply this to gambling and sports betting. So back in the game is mental fitness for any athlete at any level of any age. And one of the focus areas is goal setting. And here we're focusing on process over outcome, meaning we're not focused on what the outcome of the game is. We're focused on the process of the athlete. So being in the moment and how that person is performing. Now, this will lead well to treatment of gambling disorders because it keeps people focused on the process as opposed to the outcome. Athletes do very well with preparation. They want that structure and consistency. So how do they prepare on a daily basis is another mental skills that we want to instill. And then the confidence, right? Many athletes and athletic and mindset individuals have what we call roller coaster confidence. When things are great, they're really high, and when things aren't good, they didn't have a good performance, it's really low. And we want to stop that roller coaster confidence and get them to identify what they can control and what they have control over. And that's going to be really tied in with also, the mindfulness. And then self-talk and visualization. You probably have used this a lot with your clients and, other areas, and it applies really well in individuals that are very athletic. We always say things happen twice. First, they happen in your mind, and then they happen in reality. So getting people to visualize the outcome of, a task or something like that is really important. And what is that internal dialogue that they're telling themselves? We know with athletics mindset, they can be very harsh on themselves. We got to turn that around and get them to have a lot of supportive self-talk. And that focus and motivation, right? Get them to be in that present time zone as much as possible. People perform better when they really are focused on that present time zone. But here, they have to know their why, right? Their why has to be strong enough in order for motivation to really be present. And we're going to use these 6 areas to tap in on the gambling treatment side as well. But when you think about it, for any of us, when we want to perform better, we have to know our why, and our why has to be strong enough. And if it's not, we've got to keep digging deeper to figure out what the why is in order to stay motivated. And last, obviously, adversity training, right? Really helping people learn that you can't control the events, but you can control your response. So we get that E plus R equals O. How do I handle the event, right? My response to it determines the outcome. And this plays in very well when we talk about gambling disorders. So one of the first things you're going to want to start to do with your clients is you're going to want to start asking them about their history of participating in sports, whether it was school teams, recreational leagues, anything like that. You are going to be so surprised how many individuals with sports betting will tell you they were involved in sports at a young age and have always been involved in some way, part of sports. And this allows you then to tap into their potential strengths of competitiveness, goal setting, preparation, and focus that we just talked about. So, some different techniques to use. If people have been on teams before and really responded well, that athletic mindset, sometimes you kind of say, think of me as your coach. You don't have to think of me as a clinician, remove the stigma, anything like that, and kind of view what I'm saying as if I was your coach. They totally get into that mindset immediately. Start to use sports metaphors a little bit more, right? Who's your team now that you're not gambling? Is gambling now the opponent? Or what's the mission that we're trying to accomplish? All of these really help to frame treatment in a way that people really get behind it. Again, getting that why to be stronger, that motivation. And leverage that competitive mindset. Many of us might actually find the competitive mindset to be a barrier. Find ways to leverage it now. When you can tap into that competitive drive so that they want to accomplish goals and they're in more of a positive way for those treatment goals, you'd be surprised how much they can accomplish. And with preparation, right? There is something about that structure, right? How do you start your day really sets the tone. And then how do you reflect on the day at the end really helps. And so these daily rituals of exercise, meditation, and journaling are super helpful with individuals that were sports betting. They really do value that structure morning, noon, and night. We might think that it's a lot, but they actually do very well with that type of structure. So if we dive a little deeper with their confidence, think about this. They were very confident as athletes. They were confident early on in their sports betting. Now they're not confident, have a lot of negative consequences. So helping them to rebuild their confidence, right, and self-esteem, you've got to find those positive reinforcers and focusing on their strengths. When you help them figure out what they can take control over, reframe things so that they really are seeing their goals and their plans for not gambling, not betting, and that they have control over that. There is going to be some shame and guilt because they're really seeing this when you think about that athletic mindset that they should be able to take risks and that overcome. And then the shame and the guilt is from losing money and not betting well, all of those things that they have with the internal dialogue. Get them to really focus on the right areas of progress, right? Some day-to-day wins are really important as opposed to, 30 days or 90 days from now. Really get them to be back in that present again. And any type of self-forgiveness that they need to do for that past shame or guilt, they can't move forward until they've forgiven themselves. Well, as I talked about that visualization, that self-talk, any imagery you can do, getting them to just sit for a couple of minutes and visualize how to start their day so that they will resist and not fall to urges and cravings for gambling. And then get them to have better focus and motivation. Again, when you're compulsively gambling, you start to lose your focus. So if you've ever used concentration grids, they're called C grids. You can go to Google and download them. Sometimes you just pick like a 10 by 10, which would be 100 numbers. It helps individuals find the numbers in order, right? Because it's random and you got to count from 1 to 100. And there's a timer. And so what happens is individuals will notice that they start to their mind wanders. And the more they do these C grids, the more that they can maintain their focus and beat their score. And so then you're tapping into that competitiveness with a strength. I like traffic lights, right? The red, the yellow, and the green. Know your red, know your green, but absolutely know your yellow. So what we're seeing here is red would be what, addictive gambling looks like, placing lots of bets, not getting any sleep, being on their phone all the time, unable to pay certain bills because they spent their money. What does green look like? What does recovery really look like? What does it look like to not be sports betting all the time, not to have a device 5 inches from your face? Visualize that green. But then what's the yellow? When are we starting to dance in the yellow? And how do we have a plan response for that? Really getting people to spend a lot of time to know their yellow of their traffic light is super helpful. Talked about that why. Keep tapping into know your why. Why are you doing this? What internally is driving you? What's externally driving you? Where is the motivation? And let's make that stronger and stronger. Setting goals to be very clear of what recovery would look like or abstinence looks like, and boosting that confidence with those, with the motivation, the commitment, and reviewing things on a daily basis. And last, really understanding that adversity, right? Being able to handle those when you're triggered. How are you going to, what's your response going to be? Start to work through adversity in those high risk situations or developing a plan to avoid a relapse. Getting people to hang out here is a really important place because they will encounter those potential triggers or obstacles. And we really want to make sure that they are supported for that. So in summary, and then we'll have time for some question and answer. Wanted to make sure we ended just in time. Again, always looking at those three focus areas: time, access to gambling, access to money. Now, specifically to sports betting, how do you apply that athletic mindset for treatment of gambling, for recovery, tapping into their ability to have that strong discipline, tap into that competitiveness for recovery? What does a daily and weekly goal look like? What's their structure look like? Who is their team? Getting them to identify who is their team. And when we think about who were they gambling with, now they've got to replace that with who are friends and even coworkers or colleagues that can be part of their team. Sometimes family is not enough. What does the visualization and the self-talk need to look like? Right? In order to really achieve abstinence and maintain that. And how do they manage that adversity when they have those intense cravings, urges, or obstacles, or those high risk situations? Because it is everywhere. We need to make sure they know we know it's everywhere. And how are we going to handle those responses? Maybe even visualize how we're going to respond to those, right? Go through the mindset to address that. So we have found this to be the most helpful in working with individuals with sports betting because you're really tapping into who they are and how they're wired, but you're just redirecting it and kind of giving them those guardrails. So where we are today, right? The research shows that sports bettors are at risk, right? They're starting to get newer research showing that positive correlation with other addictive behaviors, including those substances. So in your clinical practice, you want to identify those risk factors of that athletic individual and using that past athletic mindset and experience to create a very targeted treatment plan, right? Use those back in the game concepts, those 6 pillars of, being mentally fit. And you'll find that individuals really will identify with this, they'll be on board with it, and they'll follow through with it. All right, so with that, we can open it up to any questions or comments that anyone has. And don't be shy. I just went through a lot in less than 60 minutes. So any comments? What do you think about it? What's your experience been in working with sports betting? Right? All right. It looks like, is that Tania?
Oh, Tanya. How are
Tanya.
you?
Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Good,
Um,
thank you.
okay, so I was thinking, there's a lot of information. Thank you for presenting this information as well. I didn't know about the information when it came to, I knew they were betting. I knew there was a lot of that going on. I didn't know how much was happening on the college campuses and honestly, even younger. But
Yes,
I put in the chat earlier, a lot of that also has to, what we have to consider is that it comes from the family and the cultural upbringing of a child because, running numbers
that's right.
and lottery is almost like religious when it comes to certain homes. They have the books, they're writing it down. I almost hit it. I had the dream, culturally
Exactly.
speaking, it's a real thing. So so coming down that path, I think that a lot of young people are very much impacted by family habits.
Yep,
And so they have that same pattern already embedded in them. And so they're like, I'm going to be betting. I had the dream too. You know what I mean?
exactly.
And I think the number hit, and then they start betting, and they're like losing, and then they're spiraling down because they're not winning the way they thought they were going to win. So,
Yeah, you're
I think,
touching on so many things. You're right. Because
yeah,
even culturally, you can just say they grew up seeing this.
yeah. So that was my thing. I noticed that that is a trend, and so I'm not surprised that this is happening at all, everywhere and anywhere. And I think one of the biggest impacts to gambling became the phone access.
That's
That
right.
was it. During COVID, that was it. You're home and you can bet anywhere you are. And then you have these little catch-all that'll tell you if you bet, I'll give you half off something. I'll give you money towards this thing. So now they're like, oh, there's an incentive. So
Yep.
I just think it's an ongoing thing. It's been around for quite a number of years. It's just that it is being captured now through research. So this was good information.
Yeah, no, thank you, Tanya.
Mhm.
We are seeing things that kind of go hand in hand with what you're talking about. We'll get calls from parents and they'll say, I think my son has a gambling problem. And we'll say, what makes you think he has a gambling problem? He spent all the money he won. And I'll say, okay, tell me a little more. How did he win the money? Well, he was on the gambling app and he was doing really well and we were really proud of him. And then he spent it all. So now we think he has a problem. Can you tell me how old your son is? 18. How did your son have a gambling app at 18? Oh, my husband set up the account for him. So there you go for family, right? And so we're seeing that a lot. We also are seeing anecdotally people coming in and they're saying, my son owes bookies. Who are the bookies? They are the seniors at his college. And so what's happening is there's this new form of like a sports book where the seniors are getting the underaged students and they're saying, I'll give you credit if you want to place some bets. So they do. And then they realize they didn't win. And so then the person comes back and says, you owe me $500 because I gave you that credit. And so then the parents are realizing this has been happening. So it's been pretty shocking. So I'm looking in the chat. There was a question about investing in the stock market. Actually, stock market is a form of gambling by definition because you're risking something you have in hopes of gaining something you don't have, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be. But what we're seeing is a lot of the like the Robinhood apps and things like that, where they're trying to really teach a younger generation to get into the stock market. They're doing it in a way that's very gambling like because they are, buying and selling very rapidly. Mark has a question about research for high school and middle school students. Not aware of it at this time that anything is available. I think what the university has put together so far has just been at a college level. So I do know that it would be helpful if we had some to see what was going on. It really also depends on the state and what questions they're asking. But in Mark, if it's specific to sports betting, I don't think we know anything yet. Any of the statewide surveys would just be asking gambling related, not specific to sports betting. All right. So it looks like I got all the questions in the chat. Any last questions before we end? All right. Well, thank you again for choosing to spend your hour with me. I know at lunchtime that can be a really important hour to have some self-care. So thank you again. And I hope to see some of you, if not all of you, at the end of October.
Yes, and Jody, thank you so much again for presenting for us and providing some more knowledge. Just a reminder, if you are looking for a certificate today, either for OASIS credit or social work credit, you do need to jump back onto the training platform and complete the post-test survey. Once you do that, your certificate will generate automatically into your locker, and it will be there. And like Jody said, we hope you join us for our next webinar on October 30th. It is titled Treating Gambling in a New Era of
So
Gambling.
we're going to talk about a lot of technology in that one. So that'll be a fun one